Jumping into Sniper Elite 3 on Switch this week, I really didn't know what to expect. Here we have a relatively early gen PS4 Xbox One re-release from 2014 no less, ported carefully to Nintendo's console. All DLC is included, but what surprises me most is that it doesn't feel radically compromised, taken on its own merits. Pit this against PS4 in comparison, which I'll do later in this analysis, and yes, there's a number of things you can point at. The most successful Switch ports though, in my experience, generally make visual cutbacks while still making sure it plays well on the system, and at least keeping it aesthetically pleasing. And developer Rebellion in this sense has nailed it. As a series, Sniper Elite definitely punches above its weight. It benefits hugely from being focused on a single goal of tracking targets and finishing them off with those gruesome trademark X-ray shots. That's always been the hook, initially anyway, the shock factor. But as a game, without what is, let's admit it, a fun visual gimmick, it's got plenty to offer as a third-person stealth game. You don't have to play through the scope of an M1 Garand for a start, rather there are hints of MGS5's open-ended campaigns here, with tools and traps to lay out for enemies. The focus on scavenging for ammo in missions, too, turns conserving your firepower into a big part of that challenge. There are better looking games out there today, but all round, the execution here is absolutely solid. The elephant in the room here is, why Sniper Elite 3 on Switch? We're all the way up to the 4th game on PS4 and Xbox One after all, one that pushes more lavish and open-ended environments, and I'd argue that game is far better for it. Rebellion is seemingly going through the series chronologically, or at least in order of technical ambition, with Sniper Elite 2 already on Switch. This month, Sniper Elite 3 is the next step then. The Azura engine at its heart pushes for more organic, open environments for this outing, and it's a pleasure to say it's technically a great match for Nintendo's hardware. Not only that, it's feature complete, with even full online multiplayer for 8 snipers. Given it's fitting it all into a 6.3GB install, it's quite a feat. Let's talk numbers. After all, this didn't happen without any cutbacks, going from a 1080p experience on PS4. The reality is, while docked, Switch runs with a dynamic resolution, rendering at highest a native 1632x918. So that's 918p, but the scaling system often adjusts while the camera moves and rises steadily afterwards, which does help to disguise the drops when they do happen. The lowest number here is 1280x720, though plenty of figures crop up in between, all of which is to say Rebellion uses dynamic scaling effectively. Running Switch as a portable console? Well, here's a sample. It targets 1280x720 max in this case, but I've noticed occasional drops to around 1120x630 or 87% on each axis. On balance, it's best to see Sniper Elite 3 as a 720p game all round, where docked play will raise the resolution where it has the headroom to do so. Judging by the PC version as well, it's a nicely multi-threaded engine too, and Switch's ARM-based CPU cores are nicely adapted to here. In fact, just playing it, the game feels incredibly well optimized in several areas, notably for the way assets and levels load in. From the front menu for example, you're looking at just around a 10-second wait to get into any mission, which isn't bad. As for the audio, the dialogue, music and effects are high quality too. Okay, the sound bites do get a little repetitive, and the enemies are pretty bad at revealing their position by shouting loudly over and over. But hey, that's part of the design. There's little sign of compression artifacts on audio generally, which could have made the CPU workload lighter on Switch, as we've seen in the likes of Dark Souls Remastered and Assassin's Creed 3. It's all thankfully intact here though. Likewise, textures and geometry stream in very smoothly as you run across a battlefield. A lot of this is down to efficient caching or pre-caching and dividing workload between the cores available on Switch, meaning there's very little pop-in. Oh, and the X-ray kill cam stuff makes the cut too, with fully anatomically correct bodies bursting on bullet impact, if you're that way inclined. That's a lot on the positive side. The comparison to PS4 though inevitably shows where Switch has to be reined in. The comparison is pretty clear, Switch on left, PS4 right, and there's a stream of things you could point out. For me, the resolution drop is the biggest area of cutback, but in second place to that is probably the geometry. To adapt for Switch's Tegra GPU, we're looking at a reduction in the size of vertex buffers, meaning there's simply less intricate detailing on minor objects. Less vertices on geometry in general means more angular objects for Switch. You'll notice PS4 ends up with more rounded corners, like on this rock in the foreground. Optimizations to polygon counts and LODs are in effect on Switch, but on the whole, I've got to say it still looks surprisingly comparable. As I say, it's a cutback, but will you really notice most of it played away from PS4? Texturing is one of the areas which surprisingly holds up on its own terms. There are changes compared to PS4, but you do get 1024x1024 resolution maps similar to PC's high setting. Sadly, shadows are clearly low res in spots, they're dynamic and the player leaves a pretty clean silhouette, but they're not always much to boast about. Lighting, you'll notice, is also cut back in several areas. Exposure is changed in some scenes, but otherwise lighting is very similar too. Post effects then, we've got a few changes here. Ambient occlusion, the shade between objects, is altered on Switch to give a thicker look. A form of bloom makes the grade 2, and depth of field in cutscenes is in as well, giving those lovely bokeh refraction patterns on the foreground. We even get reasonably high resolution alpha effects, like in this big explosion on a vehicle. Paired with the bloom, it's hard to see any real downgrade here. The change that mostly stands out to me though is the removed light shafts and lens flares. See this shot with the camouflage netting? The sun is presented without any extras layered over the top. Nothing crazy, but something that has been stripped out. So that's the deal. In summary, we lose shadow quality, get lower grade tessellation on objects, range in object draw, and removed post effects. The game as a whole still looks remarkably solid though, especially if you're running it in handheld mode. Indeed, the comparisons between docked and portable play show it's the same game either side, just at different resolutions. A lot of tweaks then. The big payoff here is it's all in aid of hitting 30 frames per second, a performance cap that the other consoles didn't use. Sniper Elite 3 runs at an unlocked 60 FPS on PS4, and here's a sample, but it never really has a realistic chance of holding it as it is. The base PS4 footage wavers up and down the scale, and Xbox One, if you'll remember, had a rougher time of it back in 2014. At least PS4 runs with VSync engaged, whereas that machine had tearing up and down the screen and still lower performance. Moving to Switch next, while docked, the performance is far more preferable. In fact, I wish PS4 had a 30 FPS cap, all things considered, and based on what we're seeing here. It's not ideal, but at least the gameplay feels evenly paced. Switch is far more palatable this way. By properly locking to 30 FPS and with no signs of tearing so far, it's a V-synced experience too. For all the cutbacks in the visual side, this is easily the biggest compliment you can give to the Switch port. It's arguably a better way to play it, given the drops under 30 FPS are so rare. In fact, testing 5 different missions and online play, I haven't seen any major lurch into the 20s. It's not perfect, I will say that. I've put all sorts of gameplay through the analysis tools to show the oddities that creep up while sneaking around. Stutters on the X-ray camera are a small distraction for one. That's where you'll see a hiccup just around the time a bullet makes an impact, but it's never during interactive play, so not a huge deal. More so, it's a nuisance to see such a cool moment hitch up. But this is true of PS4 and Xbox One versions at times too. Stacking on top of that is the auto-saving feature. Moving between areas, you'll see another stutter from time to time as the game saves your position, and there are very rare double unique frames, which causes a frame time spike to 16 milliseconds. It's so uncommon though, and won't affect your time with the game. Nitpicking aside, docked play runs very smoothly at 30 FPS, and that has to be applauded. The next test is in portable mode, which again shows the game absolutely cruising through at 30 FPS. The stutters show up in the same places, again making it seem like more of a caching and streaming issue for the CPU than a GPU bottleneck. On balance though, it just flies through without any trouble, even involving grenades and mines can't stop it. The best part of the package here is it's feature complete. It's a stable 30 FPS on Switch, it has multiplayer, all of the missions, and delivers exactly what it says on the tin. The likes of, say, the recent Divinity Original Sin 2 port for Switch shows a game migrating from another console and only just squeezing through when it comes to hitting acceptable performance. By comparison, Sniper Elite 3 is a great example of a game nailing what it sets out to do, and doing it at a solid frame rate. The sequence Rebellion seems to be following is building up to Sniper Elite 4, a far more taxing, ambitious game that I'd love to see on Switch now. Whether it's feasible is down to how much of a challenge Rebellion is up for, but that's all from me today. If you did enjoy this analysis and want to see more, please feel free to like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell to get notifications as any new video lands. To get a pristine, high quality version of this video, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch with me or the team directly, just use Twitter. But from me for now, thanks for watching.